What's up, everyone? How's everyone doing? Hope you guys are all having a great day. Today we're going about Clorinde. Yes, I know this is currently 4.7's second half. We're about to end into 4.8. But this video is, and I really want to make this video after like building her up, but you know, can't really get the artifacts from the new domain. So we're going to make this video right now. We talk about Clorinde. For those of you who have put her, how do you use her? How do you make the best out of her and her teammates? This video is for you. We're going to talk about some of her weapon choices, artifacts as well, and also whether she is good or not. So this is my review on her as a character. If you like this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment, all that good YouTube stuff. Do know that I also stream live on Twitch, link is down in the description below, and let's begin. All right, so Clorinde is, as I mentioned, Electro, and her main part of her kit comes from her skill. So before we continue, Clorinde makes use of the Bond of Life mechanic. It's a mechanic that in early Fontaine we've only seen by the elite Fatui enemies, the operatives if I'm not wrong, and also certain weapons in the game, the craftable Fontaine weapons. However, ever since Alakino came out, it has been utilized in characters' kits, and Clorinde is the second character that makes use of it. So what does Clorinde's kit do? As I mentioned, Clorinde's kit basically revolves around her skill. When you use her skill, the Hunter's Vigil, you will enter into the Night Vigil state. This converts your basic attack into the Swift Hunt pistol attacks or pistolet attacks, right? So that's why you won't ever level up your basic, because this is based on your skill damage, right? Your basic attacks when you enter the skill will be based on your skill damage, similar to Ayato. So those of you who play Ayato, this is very similar, where you don't level up your basic attack because it does not scale based on that. So what happens is that every time you enter into the Night Vigil state, your basic and your skill gets converted into two different attacks. As I mentioned about the Swift Hunt already, your skill will enter into the Impale the Night damage state. So you will notice that there are three multipliers over here. So what basically this means is that if you were to use the Impale the Night with 0 Bond of Life, your damage will be based on this multiplier, the 65.2 at level 10, the first one. And then if you have Bond of Life, but do not have it at 100%, all right? So let's say you only do, so you gain Bond of Life 35% when you use one basic attack. So let's say you do two basic attacks, which is 70%. Does it hit the 100% threshold? You will do the 86.9% damage. And then if you were to cap at 100% or 105 in this case, this will be the 49.6 times 3, which is about 150. I can't do the math right now. All right. And when you use the Impale the Night, you will also heal based on the Bond of Life that you have. All right. So basically this helps with Clorinde. Clorinde can definitely be self-sufficient, but of course, depending on who else you use in your team, for example, like Farina, you may need another healer as well. The cooldown, the duration that you stay in is about 7.5 seconds, while the cooldown is on 16 seconds, which is about 8.5 second downtime, which for some may seem long, but depending on your artifact, like for example the Thundering Fury, you may have it shorter. And then the ultimate basically does a big attack, a big AoE electro attack, and then gives you Bond of Life as well, and also 15 seconds cooldown. So basically how Clorinde usually works is that now that I have 0, let's say I have 0. All right, so now enter. If I dash, this is the first one. If I do 3 times, which is 100%, you see this is the 3 attack. And now if I were to do without the 100%, that is the second state. So it was the first, third, and second multiplier. All right. So basically that's how Clorinde's kit works. Most of the time you will want to aim for the 3 stacks. So it's 1 2 3 dash 1 2 3 dash 1 2 3 dash 1 2 3 dash. All right, and that's a 8.5 second cooldown. All right, so that helps with the healing a lot, obviously. So as I mentioned, she's very self-sufficient because that helps her with her healing quite a bit. So other parts of a kit that's really important. So let's ignore this. Let's look at the raw full remuneration first. Right, it's quite a mouthful. So when Clorine's ball of life is equal to or greater than 100% of her max health, which is like 3 attacks, her crit rate will increase by 10% for 15 seconds. All right, when her bond of life value increases or decreases. And this has 2 stacks, which means that most of the time you will proc both stacks, which means you get 20% crit rate for free. The reason why I bring this up is because this definitely factors into your character building for artifacts and weapons, because Clorinde ascends with crit. If I'm not wrong, she has about 20.2% when you ascend her all the way. So definitely, so that means on top of the 20% of crit that you get from ascension, you also have 20% based on her talent. So that's 40%. So in most cases, you will already have 45% crit on her, which if you were to use a weapon that has a crit weapon, for example, like the Jade Carter, then it's going to be a little bit difficult for you to be able to not overcap unless your artifacts like only roll into crit damage, for example. Right, so this is where it factors in, but we talk more about the artifact stats later. So obviously this is something that I would like to bring up. And also the Hunter's Night Vigil in this state, right, the healing, whenever you're in your skill, when you get healed, let's say by like Jean, by like Furina's other form, you're healed by Baiju, for example, in the Dendro team, the healing is then converted to Bond of Life instead. All right. And then her skill, her other passive talent, basically when she triggers an electro reaction, whether it's Dendro, whether it's like Aggravate, whether it is Electro Charge, Overload, you basically have an increase. Basically, you have increase in normal attacks and your last light fall, which is your ultimate. That damage will be increased by 20% of Clorinde's attack. All right, and he has 3 stacks, so that's a total of 60%. And of course, the maximum damage you can increase by is 1800. All right, so basically Clorinde is very skill reliant, so that's why I have a crown. You don't need to have a crown, but if there's one that you want to level up the most, it will be her skill, then followed by her burst, and then you don't need to touch her basic attacks, because just like Ayato, where's my Ayato? Just like Ayato, because he converts his basic attack into his skill damage, you will not be using his basic at all for the most part. All right, so if you're experienced with Ayato, as I mentioned, Clorinde's kit feels very, very similar in that regard. And of course, her last talent is just basically you show the resources. So this is like Klee, this is like Ningguang, but for Fontaine. All right, so let's move on to the artifact section first, because earlier I did mention about Clorinde's cooldown, 8.5. Now, her best in slot set in terms of damage is the new Harmonic Whimsy set. All right, so you get the plus 18 attack, and also whenever your Bond of Light increases or decreases, sorry, let me move my camera, my bad, basically gives you additional up to 54% damage bonus. So that is much better than any of other sets because she'll be proccing the effects more effectively. However, that means that her rotations, you can only do like one of her skill rotations in every cycle. The other set that works pretty well with her, which is the one that I'm using because farming for the Harmonic Whimsy is pretty much a pain, is the Thundering Fury. So Thundering Fury, obviously, because she's an electro damage character, it was very well with her. But for the second part, whenever she triggers elemental reactions that are like this, like Overload, Electro Charge, Superconduct, Hyperbloom, Quicken, her elemental skill cooldown decreases by 1. In hindsight, this definitely helps out a lot. But as I mentioned, the 8.5 seconds isn't that detrimental because you can then rotate between your various characters. So for example, in this team, I'm using like a Taser team with Furina, right? Once I still have time to switch to Official. I still have time to switch to Furina. I still have time to switch to Jean and cycle through their skills and then go back to Clorinde and then start dishing out damage. So this definitely helps out a lot in team building. So it really depends on whether you're using a team like this. Oops, my bad. Whether you're using a team like this or if you're using the Dendro equivalent with Nahida and Kazuha, right? So basically, yeah, that's something that you want to consider, right? Not just because it's 8.5 seconds, you can still use your time to proc her burst, proc his burst, proc official stuff, and then go in with Clorinde. So we'll talk about team sessions later, but basically, if you're using the Thundering Fury set, that it may be for me. I have a good Thundering Fury set because of Keqing in the past, but this is definitely not the worst. To if you have like I said, numbers wise, this is the best. You may be a little bit rough with your cooldowns, but if you have teammates that are able to occupy the time for the 8.5 seconds, and then that'll be good. And at the same time, we talk about this more in like team rotations. Generally, you will want to enter when you switch to Clorinde, you usually want to use your ult as well when you enter in. So it's not that bad because the ult will also take some time animations wise. All right, so other options you can use, obviously you can use the Gladiator. The Gladiator is not that bad. Don't ignore that it's on Dea. Gladiator is pretty good because she's a sword user. It is not as good as the other two, especially in with reactions and stuff, but it's still a decent choice. The Echoes of an Offering is pretty good. As I mentioned, like similar kit to Ayato. So the Echoes of an Offering, if you have farmed for it before, this one's pretty good. But as I mentioned before in the artifacts video that I've made before, this usually is better if you have pretty low ping. At higher ping, this may not be the best. Other artifacts are like 2-piece, or 2-piece attack, or 2-piece electro. Those work very well as well. And lastly, and I forgot to mention, if you play her with Furina, you could also use the Marishuse Hunter. But the Marishuse Hunter would have the same problem with crit as having crit weapons, because she has so much crit in her kit. There is a chance you might overstack. So this is but if you have good stats on it and you're using, especially if you're using Furina, the Marishuse Hunter will definitely be a good choice for each one of you to use. So yeah, I don't think there's any other artifacts that are like that noteworthy. You could 2-piece the Golden Troop as well. That is pretty fine, but other than that, most of the time you'll be either going for the Harmonic Whimsy, the Thundering Fury, or the Gladiators, which is, like I said, very, very easily more readily available if you're farming for materials, or even 2-piece will suffice. So now let's look at weapons. As I mentioned earlier, weapons are definitely very dependent on your build because of the crit. However, there are some weapons that still are pretty good nonetheless. One weapon that I would like to point out is her best in slot is her signature weapon, the Absolution. I don't have the weapon because I lost my 50-50 to Clorinde. I don't have enough Jades. Not Jades, sorry, Primo Gems. But yeah, it's the best in slot because the weapon does tie in with with a kit being the Bond of Life on the effects, and also I think it also gives a bit of crit rate anyways. The other 5-star weapons are good. As I mentioned, be careful of over critting. I think that's very important. Be careful of over critting. Because obviously you can have more than enough crit damage, but your crit rate, once you hit 100%, you will overcap. And so in general, many of the 5-star weapons are pretty good. I think the Uraku Misugiri, which is the signature weapon for Navia, is pretty good, especially if you have a Geo character, because she scales all of elemental skill. This helps out a lot. My goodness, all these ads. Get away ads. I need ad blocker, guys. But if a Geo character, you especially use Zhongli, for example, this really helps out. Oh my god, this really helps out a lot. So something that you may want to consider if you have it, right? And also it's a crit damage substat, so it definitely helps out a lot more. The Mist Splitter also is pretty good, blah 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 blah, because of elemental type bonus and everything and stuff like that. So yeah, Mist Splitter is not that bad. In terms of Jesus, what's all these ads, man? So And even if the subsets don't really matter, even if the effects don't really matter, the subsets are pretty good. As I said, just be careful of using crude weapons like the Haran and Primordial Jet Cutter because of overcritting. And then the Freedom Stone will be pretty good if you use it in a Hyperbloom team. Other weapons that are pretty good, the Black Sword is pretty good, although its crit is quite low, so there's less of a chance of overcritting. If you have the R5, it is much better. It helps to regenerate her health as well, which will then tie into the Bond of Light mechanic for one of her traces. The talents. The Black Sword is also pretty good, increases her attacks. This is something that maybe at higher refinement would be much better than the Black Sword, but I think that still is a decent stat stick nonetheless. The Iron Sting, same as the Freedom Swan. The Battle Pass weapon is also pretty good, because she should be on field quite a bit. And then when it comes to the other ones like Lion's Roar, it's fine, but it's not as good as like the Battle Pass weapons or stuff like that. Her craftable weapon, the craftable fontaine weapon, is actually not too bad for free-to-play players. So for players who don't pull that much, or those players who don't buy the Battle Pass, you may find value in the craftable fontaine weapon, which is the Finale of the Deep, which basically ties into her kit. Elemental skill, you increase your attack, the Ball of Life. Once you clear it, you get more attack as well. So if you don't have any alternatives, the Finale of the Deep is also pretty good. And last and not least, before we move on, one last weapon that I'd like to talk about would be the Harbinger of Dawn, which obviously at R5 will give you 28%. And it is the decent option because you're also able to upkeep your HP above 90% with your skill, even if you run Farina on the team, right? So this is something that you may want to keep in mind. And so yeah, ultimately Clorinde can have multiple options. Just be very, very careful with your weapon choices. And I forgot to talk for artifacts. For your subsets, for your main stats, pretty straightforward. Attack, electro damage, and crit. For this, you can go EM if you want to, if you're using her in a Hyperbloom team. But for the most part, for other teams besides Hyperbloom, attack is the better choice. Subsets are pretty standard: attack, crit, all that good stuff. Or EM if you're using her in EM related teams. Energy recharge, you don't really need that much, especially if you run double Electro. That being said, if you run her as a single Electro, she might need a little bit more. But that can also be subs. You can also compensate for that if you use like a Favonius weapon in your team, like with Jean, or like Zhongli if he runs Favonius, stuff like that. Or even if, let's say, you don't have any more options, you can also run Fisher with the Favonius bow. So that can also be options for your characters if you like to. All right, so let's talk about teams. So obviously, being an Electro DPS, there are some teams that you may want to build that she can work very well in. Let's first talk about Aggravate. So Aggravate with Nahida or Baiju if you need the healing, and with Kazuha to sword the Electro is pretty good with Clorinde. Generally, your second Electro DPS, I would like to use Fisher, because Fisher does a lot of battering with Oz, especially at C6. So when you don't have C6, then it may not be as consistent, but it's just by like 10%. Yeah. So Fisher in itself does really help battery Clorinde very well. You could also use Cookie if you really need a healer, because Clorinde does get in quite close to the characters. You could where's Cookie? Shinobu? Yeah, she does get very close, so the Electro might proc certain things. Beidou is pretty good in multi-wave combat content if you use her ult very consistently. Other than that, I really wouldn't recommend Dory. Like, Dory's kind of bad, so I'm not going to recommend her. For the attack Electro, I think Fisher is still the best choice. And then, of course, Nahida, Yao Yao, or Baiju is good in this slot, depending on whether you need a healer or not. Right? And then the last slot can also be Kazuha is the best. But if you would like to use Jean, Jhin is also serviceable, especially if you're using Nahida. Then you can also change this up to a Hyperbloom team, right? So for a Hyperbloom team with Furina, for example, Furina, Xingqiu, or Yelan, then you may want to drop your second Electro. Maybe you change. Then you not drop your second Electro, but you may want to change your other 2 units to someone who's maybe more who gives a little more survivability. So for Nahida, you can choose to either run on Prototype Amber. Prototype Amber Nahida is viable, but you can also run Yao Yao or Baiju. And then for this slot, you may also want to run Cookie Shinobu. The problem with Cookie is that Cookie will be stealing a lot of the might be stealing some of the costs, and that's why I don't really like this team in particular. Fishhook does work fine, but then you may also want then you may sacrifice the bonuses that you get from Nahida. So that's something that you may want to take note of. Of course, if you don't use Furina, you could also use Xingqiu. Xingqiu is more defensive. Yelan is more offensive because she gets more buffs. So that's really up to you. But for me, Furina is still pretty good in this setup because her producing less Dendro cost means that you do more aggravate damage anyways. Another team they like to use is Taser. Oops, wrong one. Taser, which is, let's just use Kazuha. So Taser team tend to do less damage than like Aggravate or Hyperbloom, which is why I prefer Furina, because her ultimate the damage bonus, the 75% or 100% if it's at C1, will definitely help compensate the lack of raw damage that Aggravate or Hyperbloom produces. So this is fine, but of course if you're using Xingqiu, that'll be pretty good. Yelan is also pretty okay, but do note that Furina is pretty decent here. And of course, if you don't use Kazuha and you use a healer instead, Jhin is of course fine. The last team that we can probably talk about is the Overload. Where is Overload? Where's Overload? Where's Chevrus? You can use Chevrus as well. Chevrus for Overload. That means you have to use like probably Bennett here. Alright. That helps quite a bit for Overload damage. Because Chevrus does boost the damage for Overload and everything. So if you want to play Clorinde with Overload, Chevrus is the premier option for support. Bennett may not be needed because they do the same thing, which is healing, but you know he does give the damage boost to Clorinde, which can be very, very helpful as well. And if you need a shielder instead of a healer, let's say you have enough healing from Chevrus and you just want a shielder, Thoma can be a viable option if you would like to duel with Thoma, or even Dea. Yeah, I lost by 50-50 to Dea, so I finally have Dea. That's just she's not built. Dea does help, but in general, I would prefer either Bennett or Thoma if you need the shielding. All right, and I think that's about it for her team selections. It is pretty good. Other characters that may see some use with her would be someone like Yunjin. Yunjin at C6 definitely increases her attack speed over basics. That could be really helpful if you like to try that. More attacks in. But yeah, other than that, I don't think there's much other characters that do really well with her. Not really don't do really well with her, but these are the main synergies that you can utilize in your team comps. Obviously, play who you like, right? But just don't play super conduct, don't play physical, right? That's about it. So yeah, that is so my recommendation is Aggravate. I think Aggravate pound for pound is the pound for pound is the strongest team in terms of damage. Yeah, just that beware that Clorinde does have problems because she's gonna get hit quite a lot. So you may want a healer instead. So obviously Baiju or Yao Yao is great. Other than that, Hyperbloom, I personally don't like Hyperbloom because I feel that the damage is quite hard to maintain. Especially you need to change your setup to have more EM if you're using her. So that's some things you need to take note of. All right, and so before I carry on, what are my final thoughts of Clorinde? Okay, so So my main issue with Clorinde is that she does get knocked back quite a lot because if you're especially if you're not a very good dodger. Earlier in the team selections, I did mention about other characters like Thoma. Zhongli is actually pretty good with her if you can afford to sacrifice some damage for Clorinde. Her overall damage isn't as high as someone like Arlecchino. However, because she's able to push more reactions, especially like Aggravate and Dendro, so she's actually more of a driver, very similar to our Haytham than a pure hyper carry like Arlecchino or even Navia. But she's really fun. She's quite flashy. All you just need to remember is that when you're in her skill, you want to go for the 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 instead of 1 and then dash, right? You do more damage within the 1 2 3 instead. And yeah, I think just as a final showcase, and maybe it's a showcase, right? Maybe just because I'm using the Thundering Fury set. This really helps me quite a lot in getting back my ultimate, my skill back. Sorry, not my ultimate. All right. So yeah, this is how I usually run this team, in this domain. All right. So I will start with Fischl. Fischl will ult, and then I switch to Kazuha. Oops. Switch to Kazuha. I swap the Electro. You do this. Nahida does this. Ult. All right, and now she enters into state, and so she does quite a bit of aggravate damage. The only problem is that at least for this domain, right, you have this. All right, Fischl helps you with the battery. All right, swirl again. All right, and then enter with my ult. So now I have the 100, so I can now heal, and yeah. So in terms of damage, I think this is better. Obviously, you look at my cooldown, right? You know my cooldown earlier. It didn't start at 8.5. It started at about 7 because I managed to reduce one cooldown. And of course, if you do, the more reactions you proc, you may be able to reduce it to like 5 seconds, 6 seconds, nonetheless. Able to reduce your cooldowns. And this domain is bad, guys. Don't do as I say. Don't do as I do. Don't farm this domain. You know what? Let's change this to the other team that I like, the Taser team, because I think Taser is one of the most fun teams to use, and I think that Furina does really help Taser a lot in the damage bonus because Taser in itself doesn't, or Electro Charge, like the Electro Charge teams don't do that much damage in itself. But I think that in this case, it really helps having Furina with the damage bonus. All right, let's use Jean. Like I say, if you don't use Jean, you could probably use someone else like Beidou or Kuki Shinobu. That's fine. So yeah. All right, so we're gonna start with this. We're gonna start with ult. We're gonna do scale. All right, swole. All right. So generally, I try to save my basic, my ult. Sorry. All right. Then I redo the cycle again. Okay, then what? So on cooldown. And redo everything. Jean hopefully gets her ult back for the buff. And then Clorinde enters. Alright. And because of her self-healing, right? She's also able to push Furina's ultimate to have the max amount of stacks. Quite easily. Generally, you may want a healer just for the other characters. So for example, Jean here is to heal Fischl and Furina. So that's something that you may want to take note of. But yeah, in general, that is my Clorinde video. I do like her a lot. You may just be careful that in her state, actually this is pretty not that bad. But in her enhanced state, she does take a lot of damage. I think that's something that you as a player will have to either, for like a better word, dodge better, or bring in a more supportive option. Whether is it bring in a shooter or maybe bringing in Xingqiu, for example. But other than that, I think that she's a pretty good character. And yeah, if you love Electro characters and you want to give her a whirl, definitely do it. She's not really as highly recommended as like an Alhaitham or even an Alakino, but I think that she's still a pretty good unit, maybe just a tier below the aforementioned characters. But as it is in Genshin Impact, play with who you like and not in and everything, and eventually everything will come into place. So yeah, that is my video on Clorinde. If you really like her playstyle, when a rerun comes, pull for her. Just take note of a character building in terms of crit, especially for a crit rate. Very easy to overcap, so just take note of that. And I really thank you for watching this video. Let me know in your comments how you found her, and of course like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good YouTube stuff. Do know that I stream live on Twitch, link is down description below. I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, stay healthy, stay safe, be good to yourselves and the people around you. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.